breaking news for you on the impeachment fight, and a big question has been whether or not John Bolton would testify. NBC's Carol Lee has new reporting on that. Carol, what did you find out?
Well, Chris, what we found out from a statement that NBC News has obtained exclusively is that John Bolton is now willing to testify in the Senate trial if he is subpoenaed. He plans to issue a statement publicly today, informing the Senate of that. He also says that this is something that he has wrestled with and gone back and forth over. As you will recall, John Bolton's position prior to this was that he would only testify if he was subpoenaed and if a court ruled that he should defy the White House and testify before Congress. He has now dropped that requirement that a court weigh in. I can read you his statement if you would like. He says that during the present impeachment controversy, I have tried to meet my obligations both as a citizen and as a former national security advisor. He talks about how his colleague, former Deputy National Security Advisor Charles Kupperman, faced a subpoena and sought a court order on whether or not he should testify, and the House then withdrew the subpoena. He said, after my counsel informed the House that I, too, would seek judicial resolution of these constitutional issues, the committee chose not to subpoena me. Nevertheless, I publicly resolved to be guided by the outcome of Dr. Kupperman's case, but both the president and the House of Representatives opposed his effort on jurisdictional grounds and each other on the merits. The House committee went so far as to withdraw its subpoena to Dr. Kupperman in a deliberate attempt to moot the case and deprive the court of jurisdiction. He goes on to say, and this is the key line, Chris, I have had to resolve serious competing issues as best I could. Based on careful consideration and study, I have concluded that if the Senate issues a subpoena for my testimony, I am prepared to testify.
Let's put this in some context about John Bolton, obviously the former national security advisor who resisted efforts to pressure the Ukrainian government, which is at the heart of this impeachment inquiry, and notably, correct me if I'm wrong, a prolific note taker. This is someone who kept a detailed record of all of this as it was happening in real time.
Right, Chris, this is somebody who had a front row seat to the Ukraine pressure campaign by the White House. He is the one who is said to have called what Ambassador Sondland, the EU ambassador, and the president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, were planning a quote-unquote drug deal. He was opposed to this, and as we've reported and others. And so he knows a lot, and his lawyer has hinted at that over as this has unfolded in the last few months of whether or not this question of whether or not he was going to testify. His lawyer said that he knows things that the House and the public have not yet been informed about. And so we may learn some of those things if John Bolton were to testify before the Senate trial. But this is someone that everyone who's been following this impeachment controversy has been waiting for, to hear from John Bolton, because he's so much in everyone else's testimony. He was the one who directed people who worked for him to go speak with lawyers for the National Security Council about what their concerns were about the withholding of aid from Ukraine, and in exchange for potentially investigation or announcement of investigation into Joe Biden and his son Hunter. And so, now it remains to be seen, exactly how this will subpoena him. When would he testify? What does he have to say? But this is a big break in this whole impeachment saga, because so much of what unfolded during those months that the House was investigating is known by John Bolton.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.